Eva, can I ask a question before we get underway?
Please.
Several of them. First question is, how much time do we have this morning?
I had scheduled it from 10 to 11:30.
Okay. And the second, more complicated question is, it seems to me we have two choices.
Hold on just a second. Janice, will you turn
Yeah,
off
I'm gonna
your
shut the
sound?
mics off.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Two choices. What more complicated question is, seems to me we have two
I
choices.
know. Janice, I think we just have to close the YouTube.
Oh, okay.
It'll keep recording. You just have to close it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is
Janice, I think you just have to close the YouTube. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Deb.
Okay. The other one, it seems to me we have at least two choices, maybe more, about what we do this morning. One is to work through the draft, and the other one is to develop our own lens for looking at that draft by figuring out what we want to come out of the public meeting. What we want people, for example, to know, be able to do, to feel, that sort of thing. That's all. It's a possibility.
Okay.
To develop our own goals for that meeting.
All right. Thank you. Eamon, are you on? Okay, yeah. Okay.
I'm here.
Just a lot of faces.
Yeah.
All right, let's get started. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Jamie, for sending over the slides from yesterday. I don't know if it's helpful for me to bring those up right now, or if we just want to, one thought I had for an agenda today was some reactions about the scenarios you saw and the renderings that Eamon and his team showed you, and then get into the public process, because I do, one thing I hear from every meeting is we didn't have enough time to talk, and so I want to make sure that we're providing you all that space to talk right now. And then I do think we should get into what that public facing meeting would entail, and what outcomes we hope to get out of that. And then also building off that, I talked to a few of you last night about doing some neighborhood socials immediately after the public meeting, and so that we can have more, come have some lemonade, look at these renderings, and let's gather community input. And so finding out who can host those and when and where those should be. And then the last, maybe it should be the first, but is if if this group wants to recommend that we shift the vote, and that's fully in your capabilities to do, to write a recommendation to the select board that says, if you think it should, be voted on in June, or just at least not November. So that's a conversation that I know was brought up at sort of the last minute last night, and then has continued through the night and this morning from many of you. So I would be curious. I don't know if Courtney, maybe I'll make you be my co-chair today. And if you want to help decide how we start and what item you think we should start with, that could be helpful, just so that it's coming from your voices. I don't want to ram anything through, or start where we don't think is appropriate. No pressure. You're on mute though, Courtney.
Right. Good morning, everybody. I don't have an opinion of order of things. I think maybe we could jump into the public meeting just because that was the topic last night. But other people have other ideas.
Well, I have a question that might help. Like, I don't even know how such a public meeting goes. So is there just like,
okay, let's get into that then. And yeah, let's talk about what the public meeting will look like. I'll let Eamon give his spiel and talk about the format, agenda, etc. Let's start with where we wanted to start. That sounds great.
Great. So Elfie, I think the short answer is I've led many public meetings, many sort of formats of public engagement, from meetings to focus groups to online surveys. It's a big part of what we do in this sort of, the recording just stopped. I don't want to say anything
I think you're okay. I'll make sure it's still happening on YouTube, but
Okay. Oh, it looks like we're still on YouTube. Great. Yeah. Want everything to be for the record, on the record here. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg, but it's good that we have an hour and a half because we can talk through both the chicken and the egg. I say that because the way we shape the meeting really has to be tailored to what we want to inform the public about and how we want to gather their input, or on which points we want their input or need their input. So we want to be very transparent. We want to inform them and share all of the information so they can make smart decisions and give us smart, informed feedback. I think that was something that came up last night as a real important part of this process. So as we get more specific about what we're showing them, the format of the meeting can morph to give us the best platform, the best tools to share that information. So that being said, let's look at what I drafted up for an agenda, back when I sort of was running off a few assumptions, and we can then see maybe there's some holes in it. But I think we have to also today get to a place where we're talking about what are people deciding on? What are they giving us feedback on? Is it about the dam? Is it about the dam and the park? Is it about the dam, the park, and broader opportunities? So having that scope clarified will help the way we engage folks. But I will bring up a slide real quick. All right. So these are the scenarios we looked at last night. They are comprehensive. They include dam, fish passage, harbor park, and broader ideas about recreation and public access. So that's what we talked about last night. And with that in mind, we shaped this outline for a public meeting. So this was a 90-minute event that we envisioned that would start with that sort of sharing of information through a presentation. So 15 minutes at the front when people arrive to give a summary of what's been gathered in terms of feedback to date. So that's an important piece to say. We're not just starting the listening process in this meeting, that the designs they're going to see is part of a long history of listening and gathering input and working with the committee. So showing our work there so that folks can connect the community input to the results that they're seeing in the meeting. Then I think setting the table around the three scenarios, what they include and why they're important. So briefly, just that they bracket a range of options from status quo to action in the form of removing the dam, and a scenario in the middle. Sort of saying back or getting some consensus on how this decision is being made. What are the metrics to guide our choices? So what are those measurable data points of cost, resilience, and habitat connectivity? In other words, saying when you look at two options side by side, we want real clear ways for you to compare them. How much does this one cost versus that? How effective is this for fish habitat and connectivity versus that? Then there'll, in that presentation, be a moment to explain how the rest of the event is going to go and the different ways in which people will be asked to share their feedback. And then a bit of forecasting ahead to the vote and saying, tonight is this moment of listening. There'll be updated designs at X milestone. The select board will make their recommendation at X milestone and onward. So people get a sense of where things are going after they leave the meeting. Open Q&A for about 10 minutes. It's important but tricky with Q&A. So it's important because it's a democratic process, a democratic government here, and we want folks to have a chance to ask their questions in their words and get the feedback they need to kind of clarify what they're seeing. And we're there to do that. So as the technical experts, we want to be able to answer those questions, cover anything we might have missed. We don't want to create a wide open sort of microphone platform for the whole meeting, because that, if we have 100 people turn out, but 2 or 3 people feel comfortable speaking on the mic, then we only hear from 2 or 3%. So we want to move on to engagement, which is the next section, where we can hear from everybody, and not just sort of preference or bias toward the loudest voices in the room, or people that feel comfortable being on the mic, or people that might take it as an opportunity to get us off topic and talk about another issue. You can play it out. So in fairness to everybody in the meeting and in fairness to the whole community, we don't want to keep just a wide open Q&A for the whole meeting, for those reasons. So then the bulk of the meeting follows the Q&A, the open house, which would be structured around a series of activities and stations, so people can spread out in the room, go to areas that are interesting to them or where they have questions, and get more one-on-one FaceTime with the consultant team, with the committee, with members or representatives from the town, to get their questions answered and really have their voice heard in a deeper way. So that would be structured around information stations. So it could be a table with a set of posters that describe first the project background. So this would give maps. We'd include some timelines for kind of how we got to where we are. I think it'd be important there to zoom out and talk about the whole river and the thinking there. There were a lot of questions last night about how this project relates to the entire river. And you all have done so much work there. There were moments where questions being asked last night, I don't know, reading between the lines, it felt like, oh, there hasn't been enough focus on the whole river. But I know that's really been a big focus for you all. So a chance to say, here's how this fits into that big picture. We are thinking about the whole river, but we're focused on Montgomery Dam for this reason. There'd be information stations for the design scenarios, so you could get up close as an attendee and really look at it and take your time and ask questions. And then an information station about technical info. So when we say cost and we put a number up there for the cost of constructing a scenario, what's included in that? So last night we talked a lot about that as well, breaking those costs down, explaining what 50 years of operations and maintenance means when we put a number on that, and what it doesn't mean. We do the same for resilience, the same for connectivity. So that's a set of stations for information that you could sort of peruse at your own schedule and your own interest as an attendee. And as you're moving through this event, there's a series of 3, or I was imagining 3 engagement activities. The first would be scorecards. So this would give you a chance to comment on, rank, write notes about each of the 3 scenarios. So this is a good place for people to sort of say thumbs up and thumbs down. What do I like? What do I dislike? It could be at a really high level, like which one is your favorite scenario? And that sort of feedback is helpful because afterwards we can look at it and say, clearly the community wants status quo, or clearly the community wants partial dam removal, so on. But that level of clarity comes at a cost also, where it's very coarse, and we don't know necessarily after the meeting, if it's just a thumbs up or a thumbs down, why someone disliked an option. Maybe they really liked status quo, but they gave it a thumbs down because it didn't have a fish ladder. That would be good for us to know, right? So the scorecard would also have opportunities to dig in a little deeper and rank or comment on each scenario based on, it could be values, like how does this scenario feel for you in terms of connectivity? How does it feel for you in terms of aesthetics? How does it score for you in terms of your sense of history here? So we'd want that kind of high level at a glance, but then a little more detail. Then cost counters. We do a lot of these sort of very accessible budgeting exercises where we're asking people to basically say how they would spend the money if it was up to them. So that it has two values. at the end of the day, we can see kind of what people think the budget for this project should be. But also it drives home for an individual that each piece of the design comes with a price and that there are trade-offs. You know, if I want status quo, but I want to add a fish ladder to it, I'm adding dollars, you know, I'm adding costs. So how does that then adjust my opinion or stance on that? Or if I really want to get all the bells and whistles into a scheme, but I'm getting up to $6-7 million, you know, what do I start backing off? So it helps people kind of get into the decision making with you all and with us in a way where they're not just seeing the price tag and saying, well, I want it or I don't want it, but getting a sense that their preferences come with costs and trade-offs need to be made. So it sort of gets everybody up to a shared understanding around cost. And then the final one would be comment cards. And that's a kind of a catch-all for people having comments that don't fit into one of these buckets, or they don't get a chance to share their thoughts with someone from the team. Just a place to really stretch out and share exactly what's on their mind. That's really important when you create these sort of engagement activities that are kind of game-like. It's really helpful for us because as a team, we can get back, process the results, and give the MERCAC a set of metrics and say, you know, don't take our word for it. 300 people came out to this meeting and 90% of them said, we want to lower operations and maintenance costs or something like that. It's a very measurable data point. It's replicable. You can do it again in another meeting and merge them together. You can do it on an online survey and merge it together. So you get out of like sort of opinion of individuals or the loudest voice, and you start to get some numbers. So it's quantitative. The trouble is, if I show up and I really need to get something off my chest about the waterfall, and I don't feel like the game asks me that question, I could leave feeling like, well, you know, I wasn't even asked about the most important thing. So the comment cards are a way to really share that. And we love after these meetings to take time to really go through those because they are very important points of feedback and they give good texture and color and commentary to the feedback, the numbers that we get. So that was an outline of a meeting. We've run meetings very similar to this several times. We're doing a similar process just down the road in Rockport for the new community park that's being built there, where we need to kind of lead the community through a conversation about cost trade-offs. You know, if you want a performance venue, but you also want state-of-the-art playground or something, you know, you can't have it all. So how do you as an individual weigh those and make trade-offs or make decisions about the trade-offs? And it's been very successful, and it's brought us to a synthesized design that the community by and large feels really good about, and the points where there's still tension, we can sort of zoom in on those with the rest sort of being understood and shared. I think after last night, we know we want more granularity around cost. We want to be able to zoom out and talk about the whole river. I think we want clarity about the next steps. You know, if this is going to vote in November or going to vote in June is a good point to discuss, but also what are people going to be asked to decide on then, and what do they have to decide on? It's certainly the dam, the future of the dam, but you know, where do we fall on Harbor Park and on the seawall in scenarios for the dam that don't have to affect that? And getting clarity there, because it is, I think, difficult to get our heads around, and we could feel it in the committee last night. Just, you know, why are we talking about this piece if it's not even related to the dam? So yeah, I'll leave
Hold
it
on.
there and we can jump in.
Janice, hey Janice, do you mind muting your, or whoever's in the,
I believe, if I can get Bruce there.
whoever is in the Camden office, can you please mute? I gave her hosting status, so I can't mute her anymore. Janice, can you please?
No, he told me to get straight away with you first.
Janice, can you, I'll try and call
Well,
her.
that's what I thought. It's always about the.
I think as the organizer, you can mute them.
I know, but I gave her hosting status
Ah.
that she needed. I know.
Is
I tried to
there
just do co-host and yeah,
a
anyways.
chart, something of numbers of where the block audience.
We're probably muted over there.
I remember it being.
Hmm.
And where Bruce told me he thought it was.
Well, if MERCAC members want to jump in, we can wince through the background noise, I think.
Well, I have a question. So I'm just trying to get the broad sense of the time. And so it sounds as if we have that meeting and then right away we're filtering through what people have given us for feedback. And so it seems like we need to have an idea that after the public meeting, and I know we also talked about having more than one, but that we would need to find out what that information says and convene to talk about that in a really timely way.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can get you the numbers very quickly, less than a week, and reconvene. I think a discussion for today is what then, depending on what questions we ask the public, but assuming it's as open as we can make it, tell us everything you think about these. If there's, a strong feedback that, status quo just does not fly with residents, for example, I'm making that up. But then does the committee want to, what do you do then? Are you removing an unpopular one? Or if something gets a lot of feedback about something that should change, I assume we're going to change that. But yeah,
so we kind of need to make some predictions a little bit about how it's going to come out and maybe be ready to be nimble around those.
Yeah, and I think forecasting to the ballot measure and regardless of what the options are, whether it's status quo and partial and full or full and status quo, how will the town structure that choice? And then we know, at least coming out of the public meeting, we have to get to 2 options, or are we getting to 3, or, are we getting to 2, but it's always status quo is 1, and then 2 is really what's up for debate. I think that's a really important question. More than maybe, I'm not sure if this is what you're saying, but more than, I really think I can anticipate what the public will say, so let's be ready for changing the design in this way. That might not be the best use of our time, since we do really want to be, I think, very open to the public feedback and adaptable.
Mm-hmm.
It could be quite hard to predict what they'll say. And so
yeah.
I think it'll also help in the meeting to have clarity about the ballot, so that you can say, hey, folks, the activity we're doing tonight is trying to get us to 2 choices, or the activity we're doing tonight is trying to get us to status quo and a second action alternative, or whatever that architecture is. I think in the spirit of transparency also, that's a great thing for attendees to know, like, how they're helping to shape things.
Okay.
Eamon?
Yeah.
In talking about the comment cards and the other forms of written feedback,
Yeah.
you said that you like to spend a lot of time looking at those. And just now you said you could get us the feedback summary within a week. Is that enough time to absorb whatever comes back on those scorecards?
It is. Yeah. So I don't have a crystal ball, but if we had 200 people come to this meeting, that would be a huge meeting. I don't know what sort of history of meeting attendance you have in Camden, but say it was 200. My experience says we might get 30 or 40 comment cards. We'll get 200 scorecards. We'll get 200 cost counters, but people will drop off with comment cards. They'll feel like, oh, I gave my 2 cents. I have nothing else I want to say. So comment cards are actually kind of the least used piece, but I think they are very valuable for the reasons I said. So it's not a mountain really to get through, and
these are off. I can't even turn it on.
we can process them pretty quickly. We've also, in addition to just reading them and pulling the feedback from them, manually, analog with our eyes and brains, we've also looked at, in addition to that, not as a replacement, but in addition to that, we've used some of this emerging AI technology to sift through, volumes of feedback and tell us if there's some like resonating ideas that are kind of connecting across a lot of them. It's interesting. I would never like leave the job to be done by the computer, but it has kind of called things out that then you go back and read cards and you can see the through line. So that's been an interesting tech element for it.
So will there be any way to capture any information coming from the attendees at the information stations to fold into what you get back in the written ones?
Yeah,
that's
so
the only
usually what
place
we'll
there's been-
do, Deb, what we'll do is say, oh, you come to the information station and I'm there and you're asking questions. Any answers I'm giving you are the same answers I'll give everybody else. So that's just, transparent information. It should be redundant to information that's already out there. But then
it's the nature
Right.
of the questions I'm talking about. If they ask unanticipated questions, is there a way to capture that?
Yeah, so then what we do is we say, hey, what you're asking, it's not come up, or it hasn't been addressed in the design, but I'm trying to think of an example, like you're revealing that like the way people use the bit of wall near the American boathouse is really in conflict with the idea of a grounding basin going over there. Like maybe the committee didn't know that that's where this thing happens and so we haven't heard that. Then we direct them to go get a comment card, or we'll have them with us and say, you should put this on a comment card so we have that for the record. Or sometimes we'll say like, am I hearing you right? And we'll actually just write it down for them. So comment cards are our way to capture that kind of thing.
And
Then there's like
and
the meeting we
also,
had
how
in
many-
Rockport the other night. 15 different people brought up a sort of critique of where the proposed playground was going to be. And that's just, we don't need to overthink that. We left the meeting and said, the community is telling us this playground's not in the right place. We need to rethink the playground. And so we record that and feed it back. So if it's a sort of unanimous thing that's coming up, or a very prevalent thing that's coming up, we can make sure to record that. But if it's a novel individual comment or something that's we're just hearing from one person, we'll ask them to put it on the comment card. Go ahead.
And so how many stations in the open house part, the information stations, do you anticipate having?
We can design it, but a minimum there would be, I think, the bullets here, we have project background, that would be one. Design scenarios, we probably do one for each. So I think we're at 4, and then technical info would be a 5th. If we're in a small space, we could consolidate. If we really wanted to say more about one thing or another, we could spread out. But somewhere around 5, I think, would make sense. And then we'll usually have a sign-in table and a table with, we might print out some of the MRCAC's available information, have a sort of library table.
I'm just worried about that small number of stations if, say, 300 people show up and there's 65 minutes to do all of this.
Yeah. So we can, it depends on the venue. We can spread out or create sort of redundant stations. There's 2 places to come tell us about this design. I've worked in many cities larger and the same size as Camden, and I've never had 300 people show up. So I can say confidently that probably won't happen here. But it might be 100, 150. And then I think the point is valid. We want to be spread out, but also we don't want to like make it so someone can't give us feedback. That's the last thing we want. So we want space for everybody to give their feedback.
And honestly, that would be a really good problem. And I think we would be able to figure it out between
Yeah.
9 MERCAC members, some FBE people, some Viewshed people. We would make sure that people were heard. But I think if we had 300 people show up, that would be a huge success from this team. So let's, I think planning for around 100 is also a big turnout that I would be excited about. And that we should, yeah, I hear you, Deb, though, that, you know, we could plan to just do 1 station per design option, but if we realize that there's going to be a lot, then maybe Eamon and his team can plan to have 2 stations per design option, so that at least there's, you know, 6 stations for that. But that's something that we can talk about in terms of staffing and budgeting, and, you know, there's a lot that goes into making that be feasible. And then I think just building off that, one thing that we have heard a lot is that not everyone can go to these type of meetings, right? It's not, the time might not be right for everyone. And so that's why I really want to have those follow-up meetings. And so we'll advertise those as well. And that'll be really, won't be as much Q&A, but it'll be a place for people to share their comments. You know, Viewshed probably won't come to all those, and Mike Burke won't come to all those, but MERCAC will host those is the vision. And so then people have another opportunity, a few opportunities to show up and share their comments, and we can add those to the mix and understand how people are feeling around the community, because we need to make it accessible, approachable, and in places that people actually want to go and be heard.
And Bina, I think last night you mentioned 2 possibilities. Do you have in mind a number of how many of those follow-up sessions you might have?
Well, one vision I had that if you guys are on board, I would love to do is to do probably 4 neighborhood socials. So maybe one at Lauren's mom, the Belmont Inn. She said she would host one on like the porch and have some lemonade and whatever. One maybe at Ellen's place where she has, you know, her inn. Maybe one at Knox Mill at your place, and then one somewhere else at least. But yeah, would love to have some help identifying those locations and finding a host. Ellen mentioned a few other people, so we can talk about that. And then I also think tabling would be really good. So having some MERCAC folks table down at Harbor Park or wherever else, and just so that you guys can just absorb comments, and you know, you don't have to have all the answers, and it's just, here are the renderings, here's what we know, and we're excited to hear from you all. Yeah, exactly. Patricia. Yeah, I think tabling down at Harbor Park is great. Or at the dump was another place that our team had identified, was you make sure you get the locals. Not many tourists are taking their trash out to the dump, but we all go. So that was one place we thought could be a helpful place to capture some comments.
I had someone mention to me Hannaford in Camden.
Yeah.
Even just setting up a table outside, because people are always there and they don't like to go into downtown Camden in the summer.
Yeah, we were debating Hannaford and the dump, and we're like, well, tourists still go grocery shopping, but tourists don't go to the dump. But yeah, I think Hannaford is a great option too. So yeah, but again, these would need to be staffed a lot by MERCAC people, so I don't want to overcommit you all, but I know that this is a priority for you all. So, but I think before we get into those follow-up, you know, neighborhood socials or whatever, tabling events, let's figure out if this public meeting agenda works. And then we need to really get out the word, find the proper venue, etc. So comments on the public meeting agenda.
I have a couple of thoughts. The first is, I noticed that in the presentation section, there isn't a background or overview part. Eamon, are you planning on kind of doing the big picture stuff, like where we started, what are the issues, why we're doing this, the, you know, MERCAC's role and the recommendations and the vote, how we'll use this information, things like that. And then the Harbor Park piece, maybe, I don't know if that goes in the intro or, but I
actually,
think
Eamon did have that in, and I think I removed it because I felt like there was too much going on. So Eamon, I just don't want you to, because I was like, oh, this is so much to try and fit into 15 minutes. So
I think it's really important though that we start there, because there's a lot of people that aren't getting engaged until right now, and it's such a complex thing. Yeah, I
I
think
think
it's
we
really
can fit it in, especially if we have a station about it, so we can say, here's what you need to know, but go to the background materials station to learn more.
Yeah.
But yeah, Courtney, I think some of that upfront has to happen. I also think in that there's a like frequently asked questions thing that should happen at the front end. You know, I know there are points of confusion or misconceptions about engineering that exist out there, that I think we can just head off right at the beginning and say definitively, you know, removing or lowering the Montgomery Dam would not lower Megunticook Lake water elevations. Like,
Yeah,
for the record,
great.
getting that out there, that is not how the hydrology of this would operate. And there's like 4 or 5 of those that we can say up front, because it's then we're not answering that 20 times at the stations, or if we're lucky enough to get it framed as a question, you know, it might just come out as an accusation, or, you know, a sense of distrust or disillusionment at a station. So getting to say those things up front and head them off, I think would be really wise.
Yeah, great. I totally agree. My other thought was when we're talking about the kind of costs and the implications, I'm worried that we're being too kind of superficial with those. I think each design has a lot more implications than we're indicating, and perhaps we could maybe have a slide on each for the implications and spend a little more time on that. Like, there's not just the costs, but where do the funds come from? And can, you know, if we don't remove at least some of the Montgomery Dam, we can't get funding for the rest of the dams, like things like that. I don't know if that goes in the intro, but I think it's really important that we talk about more than just costs and the resiliency piece. And I think we need to talk about flood risk more, flood insurance, and then have a part on, you know, the pieces that are kind of like the waterfall and the mill pond and the aesthetics of it. We could even talk more about the small craft swamping that's happening that hasn't really been mentioned, but that's an implication for each design. What else? Yeah, I think maybe getting a little deeper on that would make sense, at least for me. I think people are going to be having tons of questions in their mind while they're listening to all the different designs. And if we can just have a slide that's showing like these, you know, we are aware of those and here are the implications, I think that'll be really helpful. Instead of doing it in this, you know, the open house section, just like go there as soon as possible.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is that this cost, resilience, and habitat metric slide isn't kind of one click buzz through it, but that we need to drill down into cost, to drill down into resilience and habitat. And there might be a few other things to add in there. So yeah.
Yeah.
If this goes from 15 to 20, but it helps everybody make a better decision in the community, it's worth the extra 5 minutes of presentation.
Yeah, I agree.
Have a safe flight, Ellen.
Yeah, for cost, I'll just say last night the feedback was really helpful. You know, we've sort of broken it down item by item in the past with the committee and sort of rolled it all up into a couple simple numbers for last night, but right away can see, oh, to have this conversation, keeping it a little more itemized is really important. So we'll do that going forward, for like how much is the dam part of the bill, how much is the seawall part of the bill, how much is raising the seawall, so that's peeled apart a little bit more. So that's the kind of capital cost. We didn't get a whole lot of like confusion really about ongoing maintenance last night. It felt, I think, pretty clear. Just know that there's a lot of background material behind that, and those numbers are developed by Interfluve's engineers, and so they are very thought through. They're not sort of quick numbers that are just being tossed out there close enough. They are really thought through to give you the product that you're seeing in the drawings. I think the piece that wasn't in last night, and the team has to talk about how to include this, is funding sources, like you're saying, Courtney. Like, if we start, I think the way my head thinks about it is, if you start at a baseline, 2 million, 6 million, 2 million, start with the assumption taxpayers are paying every dollar. Don't stop there, because that's not an outcome that anybody wants in Camden, but starting there, how are we offsetting the taxpayer dollars with grants or donations? So we know there's a gift around the dam, and then there are grants for resilience, there are grants for natural systems and habitat, there are other grants out there. Certain scenarios will be more eligible for grants than others, like scenario B and C that have fish connectivity proposals will be more likely to get grant funding associated with fish passage, right? So that's an obvious thing. What's not obvious or clear or known is exactly how many dollars, and we can't put a precise number on that, but the FBE and Interfluve team is going to work on getting you some predictions for those numbers, so that you can see, wow, this has a $6 million cost. It might be highly competitive for a number of grants, but this has $2 million cost, but it really isn't looking good from a grant perspective. So I think that has to be transparent. Everybody should know that. But then I kind of also fall back to the decision for the voters. Nothing is promised in the world of grants. So worst case, if the cost of all of this landed on taxpayers, what would they be okay with? I think they should think about that too, and understand that there's selection if they're being really optimistic, or they feel like we should go aggressively for this scenario that's grant aligned. There's still a risk there.
However, with the status quo, I mean, that is something that is still going to fall on the taxpayers. And I think that's something that people need to know, that spread out over the taxpayers, it's going to cost about an average of X number of dollars per household, or per, because there is still going to need to be maintenance done on that dam with the status quo.
Yeah, and Susan, I'm not really speaking about one scheme in particular. I'm including, in that logic, I'm including status quo, as I think that's what we owe the voters, is like a level playing field, comparing apples to apples, these different scenarios, including status quo. What could it cost you?
Right. I just don't want people to think that, if they vote no, that they're not going to have to pay anything, because we're still going to have to do something
Absolutely
with the dam one way or the other. And I think
that has to be
needs
very clear, because you could imagine that being sort of an assumption that people would have. Well, we have
I'll vote no. Then I don't have to pay anything.
We have a dam. Let's just leave it alone. That's free, right? But that dam's condition won't allow it to stand indefinitely. You have to maintain it every year now. You'll have to keep doing that. So it has a real cost. And doing nothing isn't really a real world solution, or it is one that leads to just worse and worse failures, and sort of the deferred maintenance risks get higher and higher. So
right. And I just think we need to be very clear about the
yeah,
fact that there still is going to be a cost no matter what.
yeah, that there are all kind of action scenarios. Two of them are more apparently, or dramatically changing the configuration, but status quo is an action scenario to restore that dam, which is a project that costs money, and money that we've calculated. So yeah, absolutely.
Also, I think it's important that we talk about the flood risk costs and damages that are potential if we don't do anything. What could happen and how expensive might it be? I know it's really hard to calculate that, but it's something that we need to bring up in each scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we should look to Interfluve to see what they have for for that if they have numbers for the flood risk.
So in general, are there other, in terms of this type of public meeting, how does everyone feel about it? Do you think it's everyone on the MRCAC? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I like the public meeting, but I'm concerned that there's only going to be maybe one or two, and that people will feel that they can't maybe make the one meeting
Well,
that we
that's what I'm
have.
trying to say with like, this will be the first big public meeting, and then that's when we need to have like the neighborhood socials, because I've heard
Perfect.
from many of you that that's more, that might be more impactful than one big meeting at one central place. So that's what I'm
Perfect.
trying to say, is that we'll then have these follow-up meetings at Lauren, at the Belmont Inn, at Ellen's place, maybe at Knox Mill, and then other places that you guys decide, and then some tabling events either at Harbor Park or Hannaford's or the dump. So beyond that, so this public meeting, it looks like we have some thumbs up on how the agenda looks and how it will function. So I guess, Eamon, what do you think for timing for when we can do this? Do you think, what's the soonest, obviously?
The soonest, there's some logistics around. This will be a team effort, Bina. So I'll
Yeah.
need the MRCAC and FBE and Interfluve to provide a lot of this background, being the kind of newest one on the team, getting the background materials, getting existing maps, everything sort of up to a place that's ready to hit print is a must. So that has a timeline to it. But if we were to work with the designs we have today, we could have this meeting in a month. We could put it all together, create the presentation and go. If we're revising designs a lot, that then we just add that revision time. So I'd say aggressively, we could have it at early August. And if we want to take a little more time with design, which we haven't dived into yet, but if we want to do that, then maybe we're looking at late August, early September.
So the problem with late August, early September is that won't work if we're trying to hit the November date. So we need to present to the select, or the MRCAC needs to give a recommendation to the select board by the end of August.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I mean, I know that
by the end
it's
of
not,
September, you mean, right?
no, by the end of
To the
August.
select board by the end of August.
Well,
Oh, right,
August,
sorry, I'm
August
mixing my
20th,
months.
right?
Yep, sorry, I'm mixing my months. That was my bad.
Oh,
Yeah.
I know. I wish it was
Understood.
end of September.
Yeah, no, understood. Sorry, I was already in August in my head. Thankfully it's July 11th. Yeah, so then I would say we have to be swift with design updates and getting to an early August meeting. It doesn't answer, I think, the heartburn across this committee or from folks about, is that enough time just overall for the community? But we can get to that first meeting by early August, for sure.
Okay. Do you guys want to open the conversation for pushing, for the MRCAC recommending to push the vote? It's something you've all talked to me about other places. Ellen, before you fly, do you have something to say? I feel like you're trying to unmute. I can try and unmute you, actually. Oh, I can just ask you to. All right. I might just call on you to, like each of you, because I don't know how else to make sure that we're hearing from all of you of how to proceed. Susan, you unmuted. Thank you.
Yes, well, I think I've been talking about moving it to June for a while. I think it makes sense. I think it gives the community a chance to take a look at the designs that we have, to think about them for a while. And I think it's not such a rush of what are we trying to pull off and push. I'm afraid it'll be kicked down the road if we kick the can down the road if we push it into November. And if we look at the vote that we had this past June, a number of people did show up to vote in June. And so hopefully that number of people would come up and vote again on the dam.
Okay, I have one vote for push. Deb? You don't have to explain why, but you are on mute, so you have to unmute yourself.
I spoke to Audra last night after the meeting to get her thinking about postponement and any concerns she had about that. And I think the one that we probably all agree with is that we run a risk if we don't vote until June if the administration changes in Washington in November. That's not a reason for not doing it, but it's a concern that grant money may not be there, and certainly won't be in the amounts that if the administration doesn't change, it probably will be. So it's money. And I'm with Susan and have been since the beginning that this feels rushed. Viewshed has done a great job in a fairly short amount of time, given that they have a project just up the road or down the road, working with the committee. But I worry about, I mean, we've been looking at this for what, a year and a half, and we're not all clear. And the people coming to this public meeting will be seeing what we have seen several times and thinking about it in detail for the very first time. And an important decision like this, I don't like to rush people, particularly because there's already been backlash and there could be people saying, I didn't have enough time. So, I mean, there's a trade-off, but in terms of good decision-making and all due respect to your experience, Eamon, I think most people, an emotional issue like this, need more time. That's all.
Sorry, your voice trailed off and I was on the edge of my seat.
I guess
Most people
need more time. And I said, with all due respect to your experience with groups, the people who will come to the first meeting, the people who will fill out all that feedback are not the people who need more time. And I would like to see as many people kicking into this decision as possible.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'll leave it to the committee, but more time would be ideal. We can do everything in our power to work within the timeline you give us and make a really great meeting, but it's a complicated issue. And if folks have more time to think it through and people can't attend the meeting and want to think it through again on another meeting, that'll be better in many ways.
Yeah, and given the neighborhood gatherings that Bina is talking about,
Yeah,
those would have to spread out a little bit over time. And I would assume would follow the public meeting. So I don't know how you get all of that into August before then we have an opportunity to sit together and decide whether we actually have a recommendation before the timeline we've been given, which is the end of August. Again, given it's summer, it's the last month of summer. I don't know what sort of presence we'll get either from the committee or from the public.
This is
Okay.
Tyler. Quick
Wait,
question
real
for
quick.
Chris.
Sorry, Deb,
sorry, go ahead.
were you for pushing the vote or sticking with it in November?
Yeah, no, I thought I said at the beginning, I've been with Susan.
Just making sure. Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
Tyler, go ahead.
Quick question for Chris Nolan. Have we had elections where we utilized the ballot box for getting feedback from those voters as far as more of a poll or anything? Chris, maybe on mute.
I think
Might
Chris
be
said
on
he had some meeting at 10:30.
Yeah.
It'd just be interesting, I think there's a good opportunity where you have a significant portion of your townsfolk heading to the polls, and it seems like a nice opportunity where you could potentially utilize that as another, one of these public meetings or some sort of feedback from those individuals.
Tyler, what are your thoughts on pushing the vote or sticking with November?
I think, yeah, I think it should be pushed out because I
Okay.
don't think, I think there'll still be holes in things. And I think the more mature the design is, then I think the easier it is for those that may have not been following us day to day to understand it and to visualize it. I mean, I think it gives the Viewshed team a better chance to, I think the higher and higher fidelity of those renderings can help people really understand what that's going to look like and what their harbor is going to look like. And probably enables them to do, different angles of things. And
So, oh, I don't know if we've made it all the way around. I want to make sure we hold plenty of time to talk through how the designs should evolve and specifically how we get them to be, Tyler, to your point last night, to not include distractions or items that are interesting but not front and center for the decision. So we have to talk about that today.
Okay. I like the explanations for the yes and no, but if you do want to just share yes or no to pushing the vote, then I can know if we should draft up a recommendation from the MERCAC to the select board that says the MERCAC agrees that we should do blank. That would be helpful. But yes, in the interest of time. Courtney, Elfie, Rick, you guys are left. Elfie,
Yeah.
you're mute, so we're gonna let Courtney go first, I guess.
Oh, sorry, Elfie, were you trying to
No, you're
talk?
good.
Yeah, I've been stewing on this. I think it's complex, but I do feel like everything is pointing to pushing it off to June. I feel like this feels like we're in this mad rush right now and at a very tough time to be in a rush during summer and things are crazy for everybody, I'm sure. It doesn't feel like we have enough information yet. And so if we're feeling that way, the public will feel that way. And
Okay, thank you.
won't feel as ready as well. And I think the other piece of this that's important is that we're not able to apply to the grant until April anyway. So I'm a little confused with the worry about the change in administration if we can't apply to funding until April anyway. Did you talk about that, Deb, with Audra?
I think the funding conversation is not of an issue right now. I think Forrest and I have both heard that the funding should be okay for a few more years regardless. And I think if you look at, Trump's prior administration, it wasn't like NIFWIF was completely unfunded. So I know that that's a worry, but it's not. I think we can look at some data points and understand that the past doesn't reflect that that's going to happen in the future and that the money is going to be there for the next few years. So I also don't think that that's a real concern. So, okay, I marked Courtney as a push the vote. Elfie, over to you.
Push the vote.
Okay, thank you. Rick.
Push.
Okay. So I will message Ellen dropped off in the nick of time. I will message Ellen and Seth and whoever else I'm missing.
And Ray.
Ray, thank you.
Ray.
Have his name right there. Okay, thank you. And we'll follow up and determine what happens next, and create a new timeline and do it. So, okay, with that being said, how do you guys feel about the renderings you saw?
Can I pause just on one thing, Bina, just to offer up a little bit more about the process forward? So pushing out, if that gives a longer time, or assuming that would be then a longer timeline for engagement, it would still make a lot of sense to have a meeting like this, as maybe the first of many or first of a more diverse outreach strategy. When you crack that open and start thinking about a longer process, I think And FBE, I'm sure you have lots to share and expertise on this, but also thinking about different media. So is there a printed bit of outreach? We've done door hangers in Burlington, Vermont with great success. An online survey has been really successful in Rockport, and I know you've done some of that on this project.
Yeah, we did postcards to folks and we've done
Yeah.
online surveys, and I think we can explore a lot of those options. And I do think there's a lot to be said for continuing this process and just, let's do this public meeting maybe by the end of August still, or like by some point in August,
Mhm.
and keep it going. So we need to talk about that. But I think just for the interest of, I have a hard stop at 11:30, so I am gonna just be like kind of
Yes,
aggressive
let's
right now.
go.
But let's talk about how everyone felt about what changes you think need to be made for it different.
Let me go to each one. And I'm going to force us to talk item by item. So in full dam reconstruction, this repairs, rebuilds, reconstructs, restores, celebrates, tunes up, and polishes your existing dam. I heard a lot of encouragement last night about how to retain and reuse stone that's in place there. And so through whatever blend of construction strategies makes the most sense to create a strong, functional dam at the same elevation, achieving that outcome is what's recommended here. Any changes to that?
I have one sort of crazy thought is you call it full dam reconstruction. When I think of reconstruction, I think of tearing the whole thing down. And I'm wondering if maybe a word like repair or restoration, because to me, I feel like that you're not tearing the whole thing down. Like last night it came up, well, there's a new gate on it and we've repointed the sides of it. So are we not maybe restoring it or repairing it?
Let's
rather
ask
than
Mike.
reconstruction?
Mike, I think, is on the call, but I've had a few repairs done to my house, which is a beautiful historic home, older than the dam, I think, by a couple years. And once you get into the wall of my house, you'd be surprised how much further you need to go to actually fix something. Probably others have similar experiences. So I think we talk about reconstruction, and Mike will know the nuts and bolts of all of that, because we might quite likely find that as you get in, even if you're reusing stone and pieces that have been more recently replaced, to chase it back, to sort of chase the rot back to where it stops, a lot of the dam has to come down and then be put back. So that's I think why reconstruction, but I totally hear you. There's probably a better word. Wouldn't want
Okay.
that better word to somehow give the impression that like it just needs a coat of paint, That's the
Right.
flip side, is saying like, something a little too soft, then people might say like, whoa, why is this taking 2 years? Why has the dam been torn down? It will be an extensive process.
Hey, Dina, is Mike on the call?
Yeah, I am on the line, and sorry I was late joining. I had another meeting until a few minutes ago, but yeah, I'm here. Happy to answer any questions. I think specific to this point that's raised, and maybe what Ken is interested in talking about as well, I think what would be helpful is just to create a key that describes under this scenario the assumptions we've made about areas that would be refurbished, if you will. Whatever the word is you want to use, and with some detail, so that just is clearer to everybody, and why those assumptions were being made in this scenario, and then people can debate it from there.
Yeah, I think it's important to say why it needs to be reconstructed, because as I say, last night it came up, well, money was given and we have a new gate and we've repointed the sides, and why do we need to put so much more money into it on this scenario? So I just think it's important to be very specific as to why it costs what it costs.
Mike, would it be helpful for you to explain to the group what you and Audra and I talked about in terms of when the water level was dropped down and what you saw happen, and when it was filled back up, what it told you about the structural integrity of the wall?
Yeah, I mean, I think the observations that were made there, are not new observations, and that it's um, it's an old a hodgepodge of construction and leaky structure, and I wasn't specifically there during the refilling process, but I observed the inside of the dam when it was drawn down, and got a greater appreciation of its construction throughout. And so I understand when the refilling was occurring, it took quite some time. I mean, the flows were low, but also there is leakage all along the spillway, at the contact with the bedrock and things like that. And so, I can again run through a description right now of what the assumptions were, or we can put together some graphics, with some details that describe that. But I think an underlying assumption is whether or not you just want to continue the status quo, which is there's a lot of critique of the dam not providing reliable water levels, leakage, and things like that. And if that's a gate structure that requires multiple staff for operation and things like, even though the gate has the repair to the gate, the prior gate fell apart, and so the gate that was replaced it's still the existing difficult to operate gate structure. It just happens to be a gate that is actually able to be a barrier. So I'm sure there's debate about what or could be debate about what the objectives are for this status quo, whether or not the status quo that's acceptable is a structure that gets some band-aid repairs and still requires an above average amount of operation and repair going forward in perpetuity, which is not it was not the assumption that we put into just the assessment that we did and the development of the costs that we shared last night. The objectives that we had is we understood that it was the intent to kind of revitalize the dam for the next many decades, so that it wasn't a chronic maintenance and operation issue, even though there would still need to be ongoing operation and maintenance over time. So I can describe right now what the assumptions were at specific parts of the dam, or we can follow up in with some detail for everybody to see.
I think just the list would be great, but I think it's just important that people understand what goes into that dollar amount.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm responding to chats. Just a speed round of chat responses.
Yeah.
We will.
And Ken, is there any way you can put your comment in the chat? I'm responding to other public comments in the chat. I know we're just a little tight on time, and I want to make sure we hear from the MRCAC.
So speed round, Patricia has chimed in. She's from Heritage Landscapes, the Olmsted landscape preservation expert advising the team. She has notes on language, so how in that world restoration would be the appropriate word here. So that's good. We want to get that title word right, but also I think what this group's suggesting is then adding the details. So it's not about the title as much as, while we get it right, it's still more about what's actually happening and why. What are we doing to the dam and why? More conversation earlier also from Patricia about outreach strategies, which we should add and to our conversation about outreach. And then Chris's points, which is touching on something that was tricky last night. I realized describing elevation. So for folks that aren't engineers and designers, it's a little confusing when we're saying plus 24 feet. So we'll clean that up to be clear when we're saying elevation 24, meaning elevation above a datum at 24 feet, and we'll say plus 4 feet when we're talking about raising something up an additional 4 feet. So that's the speed round from the chat. So
Okay, go to scenario. Sorry, go ahead.
yep, that's the dam. And then as far as the seawall in scenario A, here we're saying it's being restored in place, in kind, just joints are being fixed, it's being kept from falling down. But we offered you 2 scenarios last night. One where it's at 6 feet or existing, and one where it goes up to about 11 for resilience. That's the wall consideration here. And there were no kind of broader recreation, placemaking, public realm improvements in this one because it's our status quo. Rather than digging into the wall elevation, let's get to the dam in the next one.
I guess my only thing with that would be if you're really looking at status quo, I think the status quo is rebuilding the existing seawall. I think raising it to the 11 is
Yep.
really a change.
Yep. Well, to jump ahead, I think where we could get to is a place where we present to folks 3 different dam scenarios. And then we're saying like, then there's some ways to think about the wall that you can kind of a la carte together in some ways. And that's like a nuanced conversation, but to sort of say, let's talk about the dam. And then if for you, it would be a good engagement question, like for people to vote on.
I think it's a great, I would treat this.
For you, does
although
status quo mean
two
raise the park
features-
up, or does it mean
Yeah,
keep
these
it?
2 features interact closely together, but you could make the same argument for that upstream stretch.
Yep.
For the next one up the river that you could say
Yeah.
there's options that could happen there too. So I think, yeah.
So in this one, the water level went down 4 feet. We talked about why 4 feet last night. It includes a pool and weir fishway that goes along the seawall. A lot of conversation last night about inside the seawall or outside the seawall, but no real pushback on that general trajectory. That it's there somewhere on the inside or outside of that seawall. A lot of questions about how do these things really work? How do they relate to the ground? How deep is it down into there? Down to the water level from the rim. But those are details we can describe more, but how did this land for the committee in terms of the impoundment coming down 4 feet and the creation of a southern spillway of some sort? We can also talk forever about just how wide that is, but some spillway to the south. Any strong objections to 4 feet? I guess that was the directive we got from the last meeting, was go down 4 feet. Anybody see it? And
I think a tricky thing is going to be, one of the big things with that upper reflection pool, I think, is how it's perceived from the businesses that are adjacent to it. So it's a little hard to tell what that 4 feet does to their view, I guess. They have this current pool that's there that they see as part of the aesthetics of looking down over that. And I'd be interested to see. I realize it's hard to do a rendering up there, but it'd be good to know, what does that look like from the Smiling Cow? What does it look like from Buttermilk Kitchen? What does it look like from Camden Deli? I think that would be an interesting thing to understand.
I'd
Yeah,
argue
and then
that it's
can
not actually hard to do a rendering from that perspective as long as we have the photo.
But can you
photos to do
also
it.
add, can you put on this diagram where the buildings are
like which
so
one
that
is
you
the
would have
Smiling
both
Cow?
views?
Which one is that what you mean, Deb? This orange shape with the black outline, these are the buildings.
Okay.
So will the size of that pool decrease because you have lowered it some? In other words,
specifically to the south, as the water level goes down, there's ledge in there that's just below the water surface, so that
Right.
starts to emerge, and that's on private property, quite a bit of it. So it's not that we can
Right.
just, and I'm not sure we would want to, but we can't just assume, oh, we'll just chisel that away and make a pool that's the same footprint, it's just down lower. So that's what that is. And actually, without any chiseling, the water would actually turn and end right by this leader, this blue line. This is created, this southbound waterway, by chipping away at the ledge to allow the water to flow that way.
Okay.
And how will this impact the building structures if the water's lowered? I know some of the building owners have mentioned that the water's important for their structure. Resilience, is that a factor that we need to think about?
Mike, do you want to speak? Sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Mike.
I think I've heard that. I've heard that point made. I think it's a disputable point. I guess I'll just leave it at that. But that is and I'm just going to defer that conversation until we do the supplemental study that we're doing, because that will provide a lot of clarity on that particular set for each of these alternatives that are considered.
Okay.
Might be a good FAQ for the public meeting, though. You know, does water support buildings? How could it be structural?
One thing that might be interesting on this, and maybe it would be a second slide, would be to color the areas that you have changed. In other words, you've lowered the dam, so perhaps it's a pale yellow or a pale orange. You've raised the park area 11 feet. You've stepped the granite walls. In other words, to highlight the areas that you've changed so people can see those changes.
Yeah. But yes, absolutely.
I think
in a public context, we have to really kind of breadcrumb this out. But for you all, you know, I felt confident we could just kind of put it all on one and talk it out.
No, agreed.
So yeah.
I think when we get to presenting this one to the public, I think maybe a couple cut views through that midway through the fish ladder and maybe down near the bottom of the fish ladder, because there's some interesting things going on elevation wise.
Yeah.
Especially when you do a increase of the 4 feet to the seawall and some other things.
I'm going to put my bean hat on and say, we have a month or more to figure out how to say this to the public. But today we need to know, are there any like deal breakers here about the dam?
No, I mean, the big one for me is, to me, it'd be interesting to understand the rest of this team's feeling about the South Cascade. There's a lot of work being done in this to try to maintain or create the South Cascade, and how important is that to the look and feel of that whole feature at the head of the harbor. And then the other question too is the sluiceway, or the big granite, I don't know what we call that, the big granite structure on the north side, how important that is. You know, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Susan, from the library standpoint. Is that part of the look and feel of the dam, or is that a separate thing? Or is it, even if you're on the landing and you look over there, is it what you want to see? Or, you know, I personally could see a softer edge over there that might be more visually interesting.
Right. Well, one thing that might be an objection is the fact that there are very detailed drawings of how that wall was to go together that Olmsted did. And that fish weir does hide that wall
from the inside. If you're in the park looking at it, yeah.
And Susan, do you feel that it was drawn that way from a
aesthetic point? I don't know.
I guess the question is, do you think Olmsted designed it to be viewed in that weird gully that kind of sits there to look at?
Well, we have the team,
wall,
you know,
or
Patricia's with us, so we can really dig into that and let you know how that, like from a preservation perspective, how we should.
But there is a very detailed drawing.
Yeah.
But I would also offer, you know, and you know, the intent is not for the, you know, the inboard, you know, or the parkside wall to just be a concrete wall. You know, I think the intent, you know, and the opportunity would be there to do things as meticulous or as intentional as marking the exact stones that are on the wall now, and replacing those stones on the park side of the fishway, for example. I think
Right.
there's but yeah, it'd be worth looking at this.
I guess I feel like somewhat what Olmsted was working with was a geometry and elevation of water that he had. And I find it as we're dropping elevation 4 feet, might a design, if Olmsted was here doing it again today and he had a pool that was a 4 foot lower, I mean, he's already intentionally done a step of that whole structure just after the dam element. And I don't know if that's an intent to reduce the massing of it. And maybe it makes sense that that whole structure reduces its height as well.
Right. So the 4 foot step down, I think, is what we'll proceed with. There's still some question about the south fall. I think I can see us working close with our team of engineers and preservation and landscape architects to think about how it's not a wall and a fishway on the other side of it, but it's a fishway that takes the footprint of the wall, reuses as many of those materials as you can, and keeps the design legibility and intent of that wall in place, where it's going from the water up above to this elevation down below. And maybe those things have changed a bit, so we're now connecting two different dots, but it's sort of in that spirit. I don't know that we can say what Olmsted would do if he could be alive today or his sons were alive today, but we can sort of keep that relationship of the elements together. But that's something we can dig into. But I don't hear anyone saying, this is the wrong fishway. There shouldn't be the pool and weir in this general alignment. It should slide more into the park to the north or anything like that. Is that a fair
I
point
do
to put
agree
on?
with Tyler about the South Cascade. I wonder, is that necessary?
Yeah.
Okay. We have 6 minutes.
I just had one thought about there's a lot of granite now showing here. And I'm wondering if we could green that up and create a little park area people could
On the
sit
ledge
at,
there?
or yeah. Would it be possible? I think people would love to have that more green.
I think this is a question, we'll run out of time today, but this is a question, I think, of those Russian dolls, like the dam, then Harbor Park. In this scenario, we only impact Harbor Park to introduce this fishway and the raising of everything for resilience, but we're able to keep a lot of it, plan view wise, to keep a lot of it very similar and very legible. The third outer ring, the third mama Russian doll on the outside, is what else starts to pop up as opportunities. And yeah, if you have this ledge that's now much drier than it is today, can it be public space? I think that's where the committee wants to be careful about how much of that to show. Well, it's like begs the question. I agree. If you put that choice in front of folks, you have to be so clear that you're not saying that it's a must, that it's baked into a certain dam idea, because it's not. So it comes around to just communication. Can we explain it in a way where people realize they're choosing a dam, then they're choosing a park, then they're choosing these other things? Maybe, but on the day of the vote, I think it would be unfortunate if people were really unclear and they thought, well, I want this certain outcome for the dam, but it comes with a expensive park on the ledge, and so they don't vote for the thing they really want. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Baseline versus options, I think, is
But we're happy to draw things up there and really agree. There's a lot of potential. So the South Cascade, I think we can show dashed in the next iteration, and I don't hear consensus from this crew, but it's relatively easy for us to kind of pop that in or out of the design. Oh, did I overshoot? No, here we go. And then C, so this removes the dam, which lowers the free-flowing river, or reintroduces a free-flowing river with a water elevation that's lower. upstream considerably, 8 feet lower right here where the dam was. And then it makes its way down over the exposed ledge. So this one's pretty straightforward in terms of what we're asking for the dam, but any feedback on that? The dam removal?
I thought the comment we received last night with regard to the ability to view the river and the ocean at that lower level, somewhere to be able to stand at that, existing grade down there has been diminished quite a bit by this because we've cut back into that hillside. I guess it'd be interesting to explore what could be done along that cobble and boulder bedrock shoreline for accessibility from like a grassy kind of standpoint.
This area in here.
Yeah, I just feel like, they made the comment, which I thought was really good, that if you're the closest you can get to the river and the waterfalls at that point is really on top of the knoll, on top of the hill, and quite a bit elevated off of it.
As a pedestrian, you mean?
Yeah, and maybe it's just a rendering thing of maybe what I perceive as like more of a rip wrap along this edge is maybe
Yeah.
more actually flat and accessible, and maybe more just hard elements so that it can be handle high water flows or
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thinking here is that as a pedestrian, one of the big kind of not necessarily, it wasn't a driver, it's kind of an unintended win, is that by having to forfeit the existing path and rethink circulation, we get an accessible route from above. So now this lower park is now markedly, exponentially more accessible to the general public than it is today, right? Because there's no accessible way down. And then if you got here, to your point, Tyler, you would be able on an accessible slope to walk all the way out to where it says 6.5. If you were to kind of bushwhack or go off the trail from there, yeah, it's no longer accessible in the ADA sense. Also, these stairs that bring you down to the intertidal level would not be accessible. But you're right. It doesn't get you in here onto the lawn that's there today. That's a big change. That's where the river then flows instead.
But my
So-
understanding is with sea level rise, we're going to want to think about that lawn not being there anyway.
So with sea level rise, it's in the east end of it, right? From about here over is where you've seen some flooding and where it would start to march its way from right to left. So, scenario B says, let's raise this up and out of the next 75 years of high tides to get some more life or more longevity for that space kind of as it is, with a fish passage, but essentially as it is. This says, let's do something much, in a way more dramatic, much less sort of, well, what am I trying to say? It's more dramatic to sort of answer that question and say, we're not sort of hiking up and out of sea level indefinitely. We're saying this edge changes to allow for sea level to rise up and to accommodate that.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, it's not a small decision. It's a lot of change. I really feel for the community. The aesthetic change here is, it's a really a new area, a new or very old also, but the outfall of the river going back to what it once was and being this cascade over the rock is very different from that corner of the park today. And it comes with, that change comes with a lot of hesitation or resistance for many people. And that's very understandable. I would not take this decision lightly. If I get into my kind of cost mindset for a moment, I think, well, yeah, just get out of the way of the river and stop trying to fight water. Don't sort of sign up to continue to pay. But then if I get into my sense of beauty I get from that waterfall, well, then those things are in tension. So it's not an easy decision. And I think probably every person in Camden has a slightly different composition of how they would drive it. Sorry, a soliloquy at the end there, but so dam removal comes with a free-flowing river, but it comes, as Tyler and Elfie are pointing out, with a significant change to this part of the park to make it to make the waterway flow through there. So Tyler,
Tyler, do you,
I could
could I just say
imagine more
something?
circulation through here. Go ahead, Mike.
Tyler, to your point, I mean, do you think instead of like a whole crossing structure, but like if there was a viewpoint over in this area that you could get a perspective out, would that partially satisfy that? I guess is one question. Just gonna follow
Yeah,
up with.
I could see,
And then,
I could see a viewpoint being put at where the kind of the bridge abutment is kind of going across there right now as a higher viewpoint. I could also see perhaps a larger viewpoint structure near your 6.5 that might not be a grass structure, but might be, something similar to what you have up on the rocks, like a circular structure that might be a hard element that had the ability to be flooded during storm events and things. That might allow you to stand there and watch what's going on in the river.
Yeah, I wonder, could you imagine the grounding basin? Like, what if that stayed up at 6 or 8, and there was that's probably the biggest, case scenario, but something where there was really a flat area there. It would be stone because it would need to get really socked with some waves every once in a while. The other thing, in addition to what Mike's showing, which I think is pretty intriguing, could be a continuation of the alignment of the current path, which does something like this today. Oh, nailed it. It'd be much lower down and closer to the water. It'd be at 8 and maybe dropping, but chase that out a bit further. So there's I don't want to promise it's like really wide. It's going to get nailed by water. So it's going to have to be really like blocky stone, almost a riprap that gets a little leveled out. But if we can chase that a little further, that could be an interesting bit. To your point, Tyler, just can we get closer to the water?
I think it'd be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I would
If
just
you were
say
just-
we had an element like that in the designs that were developed a few years ago as well, for the dam removal case. So,
Yeah,
so it's more of a on the beach kind of. And then I guess the only thing that I'll contribute to this further is we will get to a point in this area where, I mean, there's going to be some potentially pretty severe, hydraulic conditions during high water events in this area. And so, there is some limitations, to how far we can take some of this stuff. But I think there's room to add, it's not going to be ADA accessible, things like there's going to be like on the back of the beach, kind of footpath type of situations and things like that, because they'll be regularly inundated. You wouldn't generally try to avoid keeping built structure out of areas where you have to spend effort keeping them there. But I think there's a lot of room there to add some additional, even just represent, within these graphics that, these slopes are navigable, on foot and stuff like that.
I wonder even if just stepping along where that 8 foot is, so that you sort of have that stair step, like the picture you had of Burlington in looking into the lake. Because at least then you're looking out over the schooners and the harbor. You may be even turning the grounding ramp, 45 degrees or whatever, so that your steps are more facing into the harbor.
Are you imagining that they could sort of, it's hard to draw in this program, but that
but I'm thinking, you turn it clockwise 45 degrees or something.
I gotcha. Yep. Very interesting. Okay, so I hear dam removal. That's what this scheme is. We'll stay with that approach. We'll take away the bridge. We'll take away the paths over the rocks to the south and to the landing. will add a bit more accessibility, some flat spaces to this grounding basin idea. I think that's really clear.
I had a couple thoughts that maybe
Yeah.
we want to add in the options of adding, a small piece of the dam to keep that history there. That's, not too obvious or in the way. Adding a small pool for the fish and the waterfall. So those are the kind of three things that a lot of people are going to be caring about. Is there a way that we can put them into this scenario minimally so it still looks very natural, but people are satisfied as well?
It's it's pool, you were saying? So pools kind of coming
Yeah,
down.
like I think Tyler brought this up yesterday, having a small pool or two for the fish, very minimal, impact, but something that would help them get up, even though we're assured that they will, as a possibility,
And say your other two
if
again.
it looks natural. I think that's going to be maybe the hardest one to implement. But I think people do care about the waterfall effect if we could create something like that. Maybe it's very small, but something.
So it was a little choppy on this end. Let me say I'm back. So pools for the fish to sort of take a breather on their way up. Some way to preserve a waterfall. And what was the third?
Keeping a piece of the dam in there somewhere,
like
and
a literal piece of it, so
a
you can
literal
see
piece.
yeah,
Maybe we could find a piece that we know is the most historical, like the
Yeah.
oldest piece possible, and just keep that. I don't know, for people that really care about that might help.
You can see, like, in the background, maybe you can see the contours. The dam is over here and here. All of that will be so high and dry and in an area where we don't need to do any changes otherwise, other than remove the dam. So that could be a cool zone for that.
For the
or
outlook,
easiest.
you were talking about creating an outlook piece on if you're facing the dam to the right,
Yeah,
maybe that could be the piece
that
to keep.
too. We have some more grading that we'd have to do in there because that's where we're like removing all this historic fill to reveal the river. So
Right.
there might be only so much, but yes, that bit of a landing that we're talking about, that overlook, could stand on top of a piece of historic dam.
Or we
Yeah, those
could, or you could, for example, one thing that could maybe be done is like take this, at a separate location, but at the same elevation, like sort of, this portion of the dam, for example, recreate, like make that the base of like an overlook, and so it's not at the exact location, but you'd probably, build a concrete structure and use those masonry stones from the dam itself and put them back in the same position on the sides of the overlook or things like that, sort of. I think it may be somewhat challenging in this corner to have something in the exact footprint, but in these other areas, just because there's a lot going on, and there was kind of a big hollow in that area that was filled, when the park was made, so it's already pretty challenging in that corner, but could be some things that are emblematic but not exact, footprint over there, or on the other side, actual pieces could be left in place because they won't be influencing river flow or doesn't need to be changed in grading and stuff.
Yeah, I wondered whether you could keep just a couple of the blocks from the dam in place, much like what Powder Mill looks like. You've got areas where it's sort of degraded and come down, whether a couple of them could be left there so water sort of cascades over those couple of blocks.
Really great feedback.
Yeah.
I have to go, which means I have to end the meeting, which means I'm going to kick you all off. Ken and Susan had some great comments that I will follow. You can read them in the comment, but I also saved them and I'll follow up with the MRCAC on them. Susan's is about public outreach and what the MRCAC should focus on, and Ken's is about the options that are set forth and how he thinks the MRCAC should proceed. So thank you both for your comments. Thank you all for coming today. Eamon, I hope you have some things to work with from this committee. I will follow up with you very soon
Yeah.
with many of the things we talked about yesterday and today.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thanks
you all
for
so
round
much.
two,
So
everybody.
much. We're getting there.
Yeah. Okay. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.